Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. It's been such an interesting, wide-ranging day so far. So this talk is based on my doctoral research, which I finished last year, finally got my graduation this year. So everything delayed as it has been. But anyway, while I was out on a field visit to the late Iron Age linear earthwork Buckinghamshire Grim's Ditch recently, one of my colleagues asked the question, but what are these earthworks for? It's a question that directly relates to my doctoral research. And it's not one that's got a particularly easy answer to it either. So territorial oppida are defined as being large settlements which have been associated with complexes of linear earthworks. They appear in the very late Iron Age in Britain, in the period immediately prior to the Roman invasion of AD 43. Oppida have been interpreted as being centres of political power, frequently with rich cultural assemblages and its evidence for coin production. The linear earthworks that have been associated with them are generally discontinuous in nature, and their purpose in the landscape is not always clear. The earliest interpretations posited a defensive origin, suggesting that they both defined and defended territories, but the answer you'd receive now is more nuanced. Consideration of linear earthworks across the later prehistoric periods suggests that they had a symbolic as well as a practical purpose, reinforcing the connection of people to the land in which they lived and helping to define their identity as a community. Neil Sharples has considered the creation and maintenance of these monuments as being a kind of social glue, holding disparate communities together, the acts of creating and renewing them representing a group investment in the land and providing a method of paying tribute through labour. This contrasts with the view put forward by Barry Cunliffe that the creation of such monumental earthworks must demonstrate the presence of a coercive force. Tom Moore sees the extensive earthworks at Badgington in Gloucestershire as part of what he describes as a powerscape, which together with elite enclosures and areas of industry and settlement demonstrate the prestige of the site. Therefore, another possible explanation for the existence of these earthworks is that they're markers in the landscape which demonstrate the power of a particular location associated with the settlement feature or features, and may have controlled movement through a landscape leading to people to specific areas. Each type of explanation, whether militaristic, ritualistic, or relating to movement, creates a different lost landscape, from enclosed and battled settlements sitting within a network of defences to lost patterns of movement across what now appears to be a loosely defined territory. However, these interpretations all tend to consider the linear earthworks as a whole, rather than in respect to their phasing. My three case studies are Chichester, Colchester and Silchester. All three sites are in southern Britain, but have been investigated to differing extents. I collected new data from aerial photographs and LIDAR to create as consistent a baseline of archaeological knowledge between them as possible. Using these data, I was able to identify patterns of settlement and agriculture from both inside and outside the assumed territory, and noted that some features, including settlement enclosures and funerary sites, appear in both locations. A crucial question that I sought to answer through my doctoral research was how the extent of the territory traditionally assumed to be associated with the oppida was to be determined. The assumption made through earlier interpretations is that the area seen as being defined by the linear earthworks represented the territory, again considering the earthworks more or less as a single entity. Colchester is the location of the late Iron Age and Roman settlement of Camalodunum. Camalodunum has been considered to be in the area populated by the people known as the Trinovantes, as suggested by coin evidence. The territorial oppidum is thought to include two main areas of settlement, Sheepen and Gosbecks, and a number of funerary sites, primarily the Lexden Tumulus and Cemetery and the Stanway Mortuary enclosures, located within an area of land delineated by a series of dykes. However, the settlement and funerary features differ in both period of construction and its extent of investigation. Sheepen has been excavated on several occasions, revealing a late Iron Age settlement where coin production and other industrial activities are being carried out, but where there are also domestic sites. The two sites have been interpreted by Crummy as demonstrating zoning within the landscape, industrial activity at Sheepen, and a royal residence and agricultural centre at Gosbecks. However, there is very little dating evidence for the Gosbeck site, and it may not have been contemporaneous with the site at Sheepen, which, as noted, has evidence of domestic settlement as well as industry. Evidence from the excavation and survey indicates that the dykes here were created over a long period of time. The latest shown in green here, Grimes Dyke, in the Roman period, and the earliest by inference of relationships observed through excavation rather than dating evidence, is the Heath Farm Dyke on the western side of Gosbecks, shown in brown. The Barnhall Dyke, also shown in brown to the east, has been dated through excavated evidence to the late Iron Age, and it's possible that the Beerchurch Dyke, immediately to the south of it, was also created at this time. I would suggest that they may not all have continued to be used as new dykes were laid out. Definitive dating evidence is scarce for the Colchester dykes and for linear earthworks in general, and it's possible that certain elements of the dykes were superseded, becoming relic features in the landscape. Silchester in Hampshire is the site of the late Iron Age oppidum of Calaver, associated with the Atrobates and later the location of a Roman town. The central settlement is bounded by the inner earthwork and partially by the outer earthwork. Just sort of seeing if you can follow my cursor in the centre there. The linear dykes are located in the landscape around it. The central settlement is located on a gravel plateau with London clay around it. The free draining soils associated with the plateau are conducive to the formation of crop marks. The walls of the Roman town are still standing, and the street pattern was recognised by farmers working within it well before the advent of aerial photography. In addition to the Roman features, subsurface remains of the boundary of the late Iron Age settlement can also be seen as a crop mark, seen here in the photograph on the right, and you might just be able to make out the darker line just running down the inside of the Roman outline of the town. Sections of it have also been uncovered through excavation. Examination of LIDAR on the left shows that the outer earthwork appears to incorporate an earlier enclosure at Rampiers Copse, circled in red here. The Roman town has a long history of investigation, but it is only in more recent times that there has been an appreciation of the late Iron Age evidence, which is frequently found residually in Roman deposits. Excavations at the former Basilica and Insula 9 have uncovered a rich artifactual assemblage and evidence of an earlier road pattern, part of which appeared to connect the two areas, and it's shown here as Lane 1, north and south, just running between the two excavations. Past investigators have interpreted the area regarded as being associated with the late Iron Age territorial oppidum as varying between a relatively discrete area of the central settlement and the inner and outer earthworks immediately around it, to a landscape or territory defined by the entirety of the linear earthworks, from Grimsbank in the north to Byes Lane, Bridles Copse dykes in the south. O'Neill regarded Grimsbank as being post-Roman in origin, although there is now excavated evidence dating it to the Iron Age. And the Society of Antiquaries, who excavated Silchester between 1890 and 1909, interpreted the large earthworks on the west and southwest sides of the walled towns as being pre-Roman in origin, but they did not associate the site with the linear dykes in the landscape around it. Boone was the first to put forward the idea that all the surrounding linear earthworks have a pre-Roman origin and are associated with the territory of Calaver, including Grimsbank and the Little London group of earthworks, but not Brockus lands just to the northeast. However, radiocarbon dates obtained during the Silchester Environs project for the University of Reading show that at least some of the linear dykes predate the main phases of occupation in the central settlement at Calaver in the very late Iron Age. Middle Iron Age dates, indeed, were obtained for Brockus lands and Bridles Copse dykes. The development of the linear earthworks within the Silchester landscape, in common with all sites defined as being territorial oppida, probably occurred in a number of phases, and the earthworks may not have all had the same function or have all been in use at the same time. It is even possible that rather than being an indicator of a territorial extent, that a number of these features were largely disassociated with the site. Calava was an important site which probably had influence over an extensive area, but while the linear dikes may have still been in use, the borders of that territory might have fluctuated over time and may have been marked in a less substantive manner. It has long been speculated that an important settlement of pre-Roman Iron Age date was located within the Chichester area, due mainly to the presence of the linear dikes known as the Chichester Entrenchments that were located at the foot of the South Downs on the West Sussex coastal plain. The area has been associated with the Atrebates, a southern centre to parallel Silchester in the north. However, the location of a possible nucleated settlement associated with the entrenchments has not been located, but possible candidates have been put forward based on accumulated archaeological evidence. The two suggested locations are either Fishbourne and Chichester, possibly destroyed by later Roman development, respectively, of the palace at Fishbourne and the town at Chichester, and the Selsey Peninsula, where rapid coastal erosion may have resulted in the destruction of the site. Finds of Aretine ware at Fishbourne led Shepherd Frere to identify this and the Bosham Peninsula as the site of a possible central settlement. Excavations by Alec Down at Chichester have identified some structural and artifactual evidence of pre-conquest occupation, and a ditch of late Iron Age date was excavated at Fishbourne in 1988 to 90. The excavators there acknowledged the difficulties of finding Iron Age levels within Chichester, which were not contaminated by later Roman occupation, which is a similar issue faced at Colchester and Silchester. The candidacy of Selsey Peninsula rests largely on the finds of a large number of gold coins. But a major criticism of this site as a location is that it lies some 12 kilometres to the south of the linear earthworks. The archaeological record for settlement on the peninsula during the Iron Age is also problematic. It is not always clear from accounts of the discovery of sites which part of the period they should be assigned to, and datable finds are not always present in suspected Iron Age or late Iron Age features. The coin evidence led Cunliffe to interpret Selsey as an oppidum with a mint, but this view was heavily criticised by Shepherd Frere, who suggested that they might have actually come from a single large scattered hoard. The earliest survey of the entrenchments was carried out by Sabatier in 1797, who assumed that they were Roman military works laid out in one operation. Later surveyors and investigators have made the association between the earthworks and pre-Roman occupation, suggesting that they define the extent of an oppidum which gradually changed in size, interpreted by Richard Bradley as consisting of an initial phase indicated by the northernmost east-west dyke, that's EWA on the right at the top of the screen here, which then decreased in size over two subsequent phases to a concentration around the Chichester Fishbourne area. The notation seen here is that used by Bradley, with the prefixes NS and EW meaning north, south and east-west respectively. There is little conclusive dating evidence for the majority of the linear earthworks, a recurrent issue, but it is possible that the location of a nucleated centre is suggested by the concentration of dikes in this area. However, it's also possible that some of these earthworks relate to later Roman developments around Fishbourne, and as we've seen at Colchester, construction of these earthworks continues into the Roman period. Examination of Environment Agency LIDAR as part of my research revealed two further sections of the dyke which has been assigned the name EWK at Oakwood, north of Fishbourne, within the area I've just marked on the plan. The complexity of this area, as seen on LIDAR, also led me to carry out detailed earthwork survey here, focusing on the junction of the two sections of EWD and NS5, which that's the southern extent. My results demonstrated 3 phases of construction, which I've shown here in different colours, suggesting a complex picture of the development of these earthworks. Zooming in, the section outlined in red represents an earlier earthwork, which is partly overlain by the sections outlined in yellow, EWD1 and NS5. NS5 is then abutted by EWD2, which seems to be later, shown in green. EWD2 is quite different in construction to EWD1, and while they're on the same alignment, it appears to be part of a separate earthwork. Since these sites are referred to as territorial oppida due to the presence of the linear earthworks, a key research question for me was whether looking at settlement and land use patterns could indicate that they were associated with an identifiable hinterland around a known or hypothesised central settlement. My study of the settlement patterns around Colchester shows activity both inside and outside the linear dykes, which may be contemporary with the oppidum. Funerary sites are found inside at Lexden and the Colchester garrison area, but also outside at Stanway. Everything that you can see in yellow on the map is a settlement recorded from crop marks on aerial photographs that has the appearance of being late Iron Age to Roman in date, and therefore possibly overlapping with the period of occupation at Sheepen and possibly at Gosbecks. There is a concentration of probable late Iron Age farmsteads to the southwest or outside of the north-south alignment of dykes down in this area. It seems likely that routes of communication existed between the funerary, farming and domestic areas, and possible that the linear dykes were either not always an important dividing line or were not all in use contemporaneously. The evidence for domestic settlement and industrial processes at Sheepen largely comes from excavated evidence, which was primarily found residually in Roman deposits. I've summarised the findings on this slide showing the Sheepen dyke, which was constructed in 2 phases, in blue and purple, sites identified as having occupation evidence in green, and the locations of 2 possible mints and also coin hoards. In contrast, the larger enclosure at Gosbecks has seen only 2 very small-scale investigations, which have produced some evidence that parts of it are late Iron Age in date. The location of these excavations by Appleby in 1949 are indicated in the black squares here. Appleby concluded that the main trapezoidal enclosure and the ditch to the north were pre-Roman, with the former being earlier in date, but that they had both remained open long enough for Roman wares to accumulate within them. However, the overlapping nature of the crop marks means that it's unclear whether other features of the enclosures were earlier or later. It does not have the appearance of a planned double-ditched enclosure, and instead resembles a feature that was redefined, but not to exactly the same plan. The reach of a trackway that appears to lead to the enclosure's southwest corner crosses the line of the outer ditch, suggesting a different temporal relationship. This suggests that there may have been more than one phase of the features identified as being late Iron Age in date. Overall, it is not clear whether this enclosure was in use, or if so, how it was in use during the very late Iron Age occupation at Sheepen. The proximity of the Roman temple and theatre sites show the enduring importance of this location, but whether the large enclosure had been replaced by other structures by this period is unclear. The extensive excavations associated with the redevelopment of Colchester Garrison inside the linear dykes uncovered 2 phases of field systems, Middle Iron Age and Late Iron Age in date. This slide summarises the evidence found in the Colchester Garrison area for the Late Iron Age and overlapping into the Roman period. Field systems are shown in green where undated and brown where dated through excavation. You can see a similarity in alignment. There is also evidence for at least 2 settlements, stock enclosures and funerary sites, and 2 including mirrors as grave goods. There are examples of small settlement types recorded in the landscape within and around the linear dykes. Gosbecks is site A in the bottom left to give you an idea of scale, and that site in Aberstone, site B, located to the west of Stanway and west of the main concentration of linear dykes, are the only two with any dating evidence to the late Iron Age. However, the appearance of the other enclosures is similar to excavated examples dated to the late Iron Age, which suggests that the oppidum was not an isolated centre of settlement, but was probably connected to a landscape of dispersed farms, and that this landscape was not limited by the extent of the linear dykes. As can be seen from the distribution map, funerary sites occur both within the area interpreted as being inside the dykes and outside. The cemetery at Stanway, which begins to be used in the late Iron Age, is located to the west of Gosbecks and west of the dykes, while the Lexton Cemetery could be seen as wholly within the dykes. Both funerary sites become the focus of Roman period burials. The Stanway Cemetery is formed of a series of enclosures, the earliest based on a Middle Iron Age farmstead, with continuing use of the site into the post-conquest period. The burials in the Lexton Tumulus and Cemetery similarly span the late Iron Age to Roman period, with the earliest group of burials dated to around 50 to 10 BC, and the later burials dating to between the late 1st century BC to the 3rd century AD. The site of a possible cemetery has been hypothesised in the Barn Hall area to the north of the dyke of the same name, suggested by finds of late Iron Age cremation burials and vessels from several locations in the vicinity, some found in the Colchester garrison excavations. An enclosure recorded at the Musket Club, south of the Colchester garrison, has been interpreted as being either a settlement or a funerary enclosure. A comparison between the transcriptions from crop marks from both sides, Stanway on the left and the Musket Club on the right, suggests that the latter explanation might be correct. Excavation of sites identified through my analysis of aerial photographs and LIDAR as part of the University of Reading's CHICHESTER Environs project aided my interpretation of the overall settlement pattern in this area. Dating evidence shows that a number of sites or site locations remained in use during the Middle to Late Iron Ages and then were abandoned just prior to the development of the oppidum. This might suggest that a degree of centralisation occurred with the creation of the central settlement. This slide shows examples of the more curvilinear enclosures dated to between the Middle Iron Age and Late Iron Age. A number of undated, probable later prehistoric sites are also located inside the linear dykes. 3 curvilinear enclosures found to have a Middle Iron Age date of construction are located in Hamber Forest to the southwest of the Little London group. And here's a LIDAR image that shows those sites. I hope you can make them all out. There's number 4 there. 3, yeah, sorry. So technically, these sites are located outside the oppidum landscape, but one of the enclosures was still occupied into the late Iron Age, but appears to have gone out of use late in the period, prior again to the main period of activity in the central settlement. There are discontinuities in the use of settlement locations from the Middle Iron Age to the earlier part of the Late Iron Age in all the case studies, but also continuity in some areas between the Late Iron Age into the Roman period. I also recorded numerous small rectilinear enclosures from aerial photographs in the area around the central settlement, which are morphologically similar to excavated examples from the Late Iron Age to Roman periods. One particular type of settlement that is seen as spanning these periods and often more associated with the Roman period is the ladder type settlement. 2 examples are found just outside the dykes, one to the west of Grimsbank, Rag Hill Farm, in the centre right of the slide, which was dated through excavation to the Late Iron Age to Roman periods, and a site of similar form recorded by me to the south of the dykes at Little London, bottom left. It seems possible that the landscape around the new large settlement was not devoid of activity and that there were links between the central oppidum and smaller farmsteads and areas of cultivation. Evidence for field systems, shown in blue on the map here, are very scarce in this area, partly due to the heavy clay soils around the gravel plateau on which crop marks do not readily form. Here is one example to the north of the central settlement, which I could only find evidence for on photographs taken in the 1930s. Here, banked field boundaries are shown in red, with some associated ditches in green. In contrast, the data gathered in my research at Chichester shows the presence of extensive linear later prehistoric field systems on the West Sussex coastal plain to the south of the linear dykes, which are characteristically similar to previously mapped field systems which cover the South Downs to the north of the dykes. And here are two examples. While less contiguous on the coastal plain, where the heavy clay means that it was quite a job to identify the crop marks, parallels in alignment and form can be identified, including the occurrence of trackways flanked by ditches, which Kerwin interpreted as droveways, with cultivation on each side, possibly linking settlements. Later prehistoric type field systems are known to have extended periods of use, but elements in this area have been dated to the late Iron Age. It seems probable that given the vast area covered by field systems and the similarities between those to the north and south of the dykes, that there was a degree of connectivity within the landscape, possibly linking to a centre located in the Fishbourne and Chichester area, an extended territory that does not wholly relate to the linear earthworks. No Middle Iron Age settlement in the Chichester area is grouped around West Hampnet and in fairly close proximity to the northernmost dyke, EWA. These sites include Carnseat and Selhurst Park Farm, both of which are based around banjo enclosures. There are a number of settlements concentrated in the Chichester Fishbourne area, which have been dated through excavation to the late Iron Age, and they are shown at the yellow squares on the map. But previous transcription work on the South Downs and my research shows that there were also numerous undated settlements, which are shown in purple, which are similar morphologically, located to the north and south of the main concentration of linear dykes. This might also point to connectivity within an extensive agricultural landscape, possibly linking to a central settlement or series of settlements continuing into the late Iron Age. Examples of dated late Iron Age sites are shown here, from locations both on the South Downs and the West Sussex coastal plain. Copse Farm on the right went out of use in the early 1st century AD. The distribution of late Iron Age sites, in common with the Colchester area, is influenced by the pattern of modern development, mineral extraction and road building. However, the lack of Middle Iron Age sites discovered in the Chichester Fishbourne area, the apparent focus of late Iron Age sites and the abandonment of settlements around West Hampnet may be significant when considering the possibility that a focal settlement for an oppidum might have been created in this location in the latter part of the late Iron Age. Numerous undated rectilinear enclosures, which are morphologically similar to the late Iron Age and Roman settlements, are located across the South Downs, examples of which are seen here on the left. But I also identified a number of settlements which might also date to the late Iron Age to Roman period on the coastal plain, 2 additional groups of enclosures at Old Place Farm, 2 larger settlements at Whitehouse Farm and to the west of Chichester, and Groves Farm to the southeast. It would appear that elements of the earthworks that have been associated with territorial oppida may be linked to a longer history of the landscapes in which they sit. And my research led me to question some of the assumptions about these sites. Rather than being developed in empty places, they may merely represent the latest development in a landscape which reflects social change within their locale. Oppida have frequently been seen as centralising forces in a landscape, causing the abandonment of smaller settlements around them. But the evidence from my research suggests they were surrounded by contemporary farmsteads in an agricultural hinterland. The presence of these extensive complexes of linear earthworks has been seen as the defining trait of a territorial oppidum, and in the case of Chichester forms the main evidence for such a site. However, the features of which these complexes are comprised do not necessarily constitute unified systems. Hazelgrove has suggested that they might be the product of piecemeal accretion, but I would suggest that earlier elements may not have retained their functional importance in the landscape, rather than being used together with its successive additions. The concept of a territory delineated by earthworks is hard to sustain in all three cases. The dikes differ in placement and construction and may not have experienced a contemporary period of use, and both the settlement patterns and locations of funerary sites suggest that the concept of territory was more fluid than might be suggested by the positioning of these earthworks. A key question that came out of my research was, therefore, what the majority of the linear dikes found around these sites were not associated with the late Iron Age central settlement. The dates obtained for sections of the dikes at Silchester indicate that some of the elements originated in the Middle Iron Age, a considerable period before the time of the creation of the oppidum. Hypothetically, the Brocas Landsdyke and Grimm's Bank, shown here in red, may represent earlier phases of the division of the landscape and not have any association with the oppidum. Another point is the positioning of the later settlement, probably taking advantage of the free draining soils on the gravel plateau, but by no means in the centre of the suggested territory. The Colchester dikes were interpreted by Hawkes as two distinct earthwork groups based on the River Colne and the Roman River, but seen as an accreted development by Crumming. The interpretations depend on seeing the landscape as either a series of separate developments or as a process of continuous development. Hypothetically, the development of the oppidum may have been focused on the Sheepen area, defined by the echoing alignments of the Lexden and Sheepen dikes, shown in dark grey here. The Beerchurch Barnhall dike to the east might also have been added to the landscape during this period, possibly relating to control of movement from the east adjacent to the confluence of the River Colne and the Roman River, while the dikes defining the Gosbecks area retained less relevance. The creation of the various phases of the Chichester entrenchments probably also occurred over an extended period of time. And it's possible that these features should not all be seen as having an association with a potential oppidum. It could be that some of the phases relate to territorial divisions that predate any form of a central settlement, such as the main east-west earthwork shown in white here. Equally, other phases, shown in grey and black, may be associated with developments in the post-conquest period around Fishbourne. The concept of a specific territory bounded by linear earthworks places an artificial distinction between these sites and the apparent links with the landscapes around them, and the dikes have been associated with them and not necessarily coherent systems. Excavated evidence from my own research have shown that they were created in many phases, and it's probable that each dike has its own individual rich biography. The dating of these earthworks in the Silchester area shows that the linear dikes were created over a long period of time, and as excavated evidence from Colchester demonstrates, that they were not necessarily all in use at the same time. The Sheepen dike was levelled and the Grimes ditch created in the Roman period, for example. If we follow Bradley's suggestion that progressively smaller areas of land were being defined by the dikes in Chichester, might also follow that different areas were considered within or without the dikes at Silchester and Colchester, suggesting a changing definition of territory from the Iron Age and then probably into the Roman period. Past definitions of their function have been couched in military terms. They've been seen as primarily defensive and are described in a similar manner to the type of 20th century anti-invasion defences that Paul was talking about earlier. Their discontinuous nature is explained by their filling in gaps between natural obstacles such as marshy ground, in the same way that the routes of Second World War stock lines are described. However, Hazelgrove suggests that rather than seeing the extensive linear earthworks around territorial oppida as a unique development, they should instead be regarded as a manifestation of a general phenomenon of land division that had been seen in Britain over a long period of time, particularly in two main phases, the late Bronze Age to early Iron Age, and then in the Middle to late Iron Age. However, focusing the construction of a succession of dikes on one side of a site only suggests embellishment for the sake of display, creation and later enhancement of a barrier, with the motive increasing the prestige of the settlement and confirming the status of its inhabitants. Bevan noted that the creation of multiple ditched earthworks, as here by adding dikes to an existing location, emphasises the importance of a boundary, but without increasing its efficiency. This may have been the situation at Colchester and Silchester, where there is concentrations of linear dikes on one side of the settlements, assuming that the earlier features continued to exist as earthworks while the later features were constructed. The consistency of location and alignment to Colchester suggests a stronger case for embellishment of existing earthworks, but the situation is less clear at Silchester. Moore speculates that there are two phases of dikes at Badgenden, the later embellishing the earlier, and both together creating a series of elaborate entrances into the complex of sites within them. Bowden and McComish has suggested that linear earthworks across the later prehistoric period may have had a symbolic as well as practical purpose, reinforcing the connection of people to the land in which they lived and helping to define their territory, their identity as a community, an idea echoed by Sharples. Whether their construction was determined by a coercive force or by willing participants, the scale and extent of the linear dikes is considerable. Their presence suggests the significance of their locations, but they may represent several phases of land divisions. Oppida were important settlements and undoubtedly affected and influenced extensive landscapes around them, but it is possible that they were only associated with one phase of these earthworks. They may have been symbolic markers in the landscape, possibly directing the movement of people and reinforcing ideas of community. But as patterns of settlement changed and varied over time, and territorial boundaries fluctuated, the meaning and regard that they have from those living in their vicinity probably also changed. Thank you very much for listening.